this year on the American catalog that just came out. So this would be the great thing to do. So you get to hear me. But I'm going to read from other people's voices. So you get to hear other voices of other writers. So, before I forget, because I'll forget and then Pam will shoot me. If you're wanting to buy a book, either for yourself, if you're not someone that's getting one because you contributed, or you want to give it as a gift or for yourself, there is a special 1 day only. It is $35, which is even bigger than the regular discount that we all get as members and everything. So it's $35 if you are so inclined today. Pam? It is amazing. It is also a lesson in taking 12 years to finish a catalog. So we got a grant in 2008. So 12 years ago, we got a grant from the Luce Foundation to do a catalog of the America collection. We had done one in the 80s, late 80s. And it's the one that has you may have seen it. It has the Winslow Homer paying on the front of it. But it was time to do a new one. And our curator at the time, Melissa Wolf, came up with this extraordinary proposal that I'll tell you about some of the highlights of why they founded this, and submitted it to the Luce Foundation. And we got this major grant that enabled us to hire scholars and writers and do all this new research and everything. And it was supposed to be done within, I think, 3 years, 4 years. 12 years later, so Melissa then leaves us and is now the curator at St. Louis just a few years ago, and it still wasn't done. Melissa had wonderful assistants, research assistants that were on staff that helped, everything. And we just could never quite bring it across the line. And of course, the thing that haunted us is we kept collecting. So we'd hired all these writers, but you'd have to hire more because there's more art. You couldn't create a book of the collection that looked like the collection in 2008. So there was this constant creating, more, adding more in. And we got really close to the end, and I almost failed to remember to put in Donna and Rodney Wasserstrom's quote collection. I was like, we had one, which didn't seem significant enough. We needed to do something, a bigger footprint. So in the end, it is 705 pages long. It has 72 different writers, 128 works of art are individually discussed, and then there are 9 collection essays that, because the museum's been called a collection of collections, so it is an incredible tome. You've heard that, it takes a village to do anything. Well, this really was a very Columbus and Ohio-centric project. So we used a local designer. He runs a company that actually is in Worthington that's called Nonfiction, Neil Weingard. Neil is the designer. Our old editor who has retired, Chris Duckworth, runs his own small editing company. He was the editor. West Camp published it here, so it was printed here in Ohio. It had to go to, can't remember, it's Cleveland or Cincinnati. Jordan, do you remember it was Cleveland or Cincinnati? Had to go to Cleveland or Cincinnati to go to the binder because it was so big they couldn't bind it here. And it took several trucks to bring it down because it's so big. And then finally, Ohio University Press came on as the co-publisher with us and the distributor. So we really have, everybody's there to sort of make it happen. This is an interesting, we came up with this little sort of symbol of it. The reason for this is if you buy the book, this book has got more bells and whistles than I've ever. Neil kept adding things. I said, well, I can't pay for that. He goes, I'll just do that anyway. So the cover of the book cover, can be folded in 2 different ways. So you can either buy it and the cover would be Bellows, Polo at Lakewood, or Edna Andrade's painting. And so we came up with this kind of logo for the catalog because you can fold it either way. Because of that, they had to hand fold all the book covers. because you couldn't send them through the museum through a machine because the folds would be too like mechanically precise. I think the people at West Camp were long suffering on this. So it's really kind of crazy, but that's why we use this particular logo. And the other thought we had was we thought we'd roll it out in a unique way. So we came up with the idea of doing a little video. It's already been running for some time at the Gateway as part of the promos before you see a movie at Gateway. But we just posted it on Instagram because it's Wow and Wonder weekend and gallery hop and everything. So we kind of thought this would be the weekend for us to do this. And how do I make the video go? I'm assuming you're doing that, or? No, that's the next slide. We want to go back to this. No. We want this to run. It has to have language. You turn it up. You have to hear the language.
Georgia O'Keeffe. How come I'm not in this new book by Columbus Museum of Art?
Because it's a book about the American collection at the Columbus Museum of Art. Picasso, you're a Spanish artist and you live in France.
So? But Americans love me. Who wrote this book?
Lots of creative people like Joyce Carol Oates, Wil Haygood, Piper Kerwin, Larry Smith.
Hey, that's a good idea. Hire famous writers to sing your praises. I think I'll do the same. You know what I always say? Good artists borrow, great artists steal.
So that is our little promo video. That it will be everywhere. Please, it'll be on our Instagram page, our Facebook page, I suppose, everything. So we're really excited about that. Our friends at Catco helped us connect to a young filmmaker and to the actors. So we're really grateful for their help. We could not have done this without them. And we hope you notice. You noticed that Georgia O'Keeffe was happy because she was reading the page with her own work. I don't want people to think that I think George O'Keeffe is any less competitive than Pablo Picasso. So one of the big ideas in this book is most collection catalogs are written almost exclusively by art historians and curators. And so Melissa's big idea was to have different voices, to have art historians and curators, but to have other voices, to hire people from different fields. And so after she left, we had become very good friends. Piper Kerwin and Larry Smith lived in Columbus for, I don't know, longer than we thought they would, maybe like 3 or 4 years. And I asked Larry to do 2 6-word memoirs. Actually, I asked him to do a 6-word memoir for the book. He's known for this. This is the thing that he's nationally known for. And so he came up with several options, and then we came up with the idea of opening the book with one of the 6-word memoirs, this one, and then the end of the book, it's bookended with another 6-word memoir. So Larry did that, which I thought was incredible. So it's a little bit of an insider's baseball if you don't know who Larry is and what's going on with that, but many people do know who Larry Smith is. Then the book moves to, as I said, we've been called the collection of collections. And so we have extended essays on 9 different collections from the museum's collection. So they are both donor collections like the Howd collection and the Stuck collection and the Schiller collection, but they're also artist collections like our Bellows collections, our Pierce collections, our Amina Robinson, and our Sidney Chaffetz. And the Wasserstrom is another collector's collection. So that is the beginning of the book. You get 9 extended essays. There's also a preface by me that talks about how the story of American art sort of evolves here at the museum. And it was also an opportunity because at some point you just have to stop. You can't have any more objects that you acquired. So we put the end of it, I think, was in 17. Nothing we acquired after 17 could have an entry we just couldn't do it. We had to stop. No more entries. But what I did was I was able to use the acquisitions in 18. Some of those highlights are woven into my director's preface. But American art has always been really important in Columbus, at the Columbus Museum of Art. Our founding really has a great deal to do with the story of American art. And there are really two reasons. I mean, it's really very much a happenstance of history, the two kind of historical accidents. One is that George Bellows was born here. So the fact that this is his hometown is incredibly important. And that's and the reason that we have the most important George Bellows painting collection in the country is because he was from here. And the fact that he never forgot his hometown, I mean, some of you know this, but others might not. So George Bellows gets to his junior year at Ohio State. His father's hoping that he'll be an architect. George he conveniently forgets to take his junior year exams and is not invited back for his senior year, which is really what he wanted. He did not want to go back to Ohio State for his fourth year. He wanted to go to New York. And so because he can't go back, his father allows him to go to New York to study painting. And so that's sort of, the story lies there. But he never forgot Columbus. Actually, when he's launching his career, one of the aspects of Bellows' career that we kind of sometimes forget about is his portraiture. And most of his early portrait commissions came from Columbus, Ohio. They're people from here. In fact, we own two great portraits that are actually by women who are in-laws of each other. Their children were married. So that was incredibly important in his launching. The other thing about him is interesting is that Columbus, Ohio hosted the first major exhibition of the Bellows, and Bellows' teacher was a man named Robert Henry. So the Henry-Bellows Circle, the very first major exhibition outside of New York was here. Bellows and Henry organized it, and they had it in Columbus, Ohio. They had this crazy idea they could make Columbus, Ohio, like the center of the the new Center for American Art. I don't think that kind of turned out for them, but this great show, and I'll mention it at the end of the talk because there's a great story about that exhibition. But that was one reason. So George Bellows, that legacy meant Columbus goes for American art in a big way. The second is a man named Ferdinand Howd. I usually bring a photograph of Mr. Howd. There's a great photo of Mr. Howd standing in our new galleries in 1931 with a stogie. We must have let him smoke or do whatever he wanted because it was Mr. Howd. But Mr. Howd collected both European and American modernism. He collected the Americans first. In fact, he has a distinction. Even Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney and Duncan Phillips collected Europeans first and moved to the Americans. Mr. Howd collected Americans first and then moved to fill in with European work. So his collection coming here, or his whole collection didn't come here. It's like 70% of his collection came here. That, again, creates, so the fact that we have all these John Marins and Charles DeMuth and Charles Sheeler and all of that is grounded. Though, interestingly enough, the one American artist that Ferdinand Howd never bought was George Bellows. He could care less about George Bellows. And so that's kind of interesting. So American art has always been like the big thing here. And so it's not surprising that we would continue to see it as a key part of our identity. The Luce Foundation actually no longer even funds collections catalogs. Collections catalogs are sort of becoming something of the past because the moment you publish them, they're outdated. They're like catalog raisonnés. The moment you publish them, catalog raisonnés are moving to online publication. I think ultimately collections catalogs will also move the same way because you can constantly update them. You can constantly share in a different way. And in fact, I was in New York 2 years ago, and I was one of the leading people at the Luce Foundation. Actually comes from Columbus, Ohio. He's in the process of retiring and moving back here actually right now. But he said, well, nip and tuck. And I said, nip and tuck? He goes, yes, you're nip and tuck in. There's only two of you. And I said, two of us? He goes, yes, for the longest outstanding grant. And you do not want to win this race. And I said, I know, I'm working on it, I'm working on it, I'm working on it. But it was very funny. He's like, it's not something that would be, something you want. And so, yeah, I've forgotten who the other candidate was, but I don't actually know whether we beat them out or not. Possibly we are the longest outstanding one. So another aspect of the book that was very unique and really interested the Luce Foundation was this idea that Melissa had of doing intersections, taking one work of art and having two writers. She wanted everyone to write not to do a standard catalog entry. She wanted everybody to take their perspective take an angle, take a perspective on the work of art that's kind of personal or unique. Don't just do the standard entry. She wanted to do that throughout the book. But she wanted these moments, these intersection essays where you had one work of art and you had two writers ideally from different disciplines, different professions. You can easily find them in the book because another thing that Neil did is he short-paged each one of those. So when you flip through it, it'll go to an intersection essay because there's a short, heavy page right before them. It's kind of a fun thing. So this one, William Harnett's After the Hunt, which is a significant picture in the museum's collection. The two writers, one was an art historian, who I'm not going to read. I was actually going to read a little bit of the art historian, almost to kind of laugh about how we all, as art historians, say things. But I thought that was not a good thing. So there's a really standard art historical essay that uses a lot of academic language. Really, it's a strong essay. But it's paired with a man named Ronald Saarinen Swanson, who's actually the grandson of a very famous architect. But the reason we invited him to write was that he is a renowned outdoorsman. So while the art historian is talking about how it fits into 19th century painting, both still life and landscape, and trompe l'oeil, Mr. Swanson writes this: in my basement in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, a Detroit suburb, a small room is filled with hunting and fishing gear. On one wall is a series of clothes hooks with many interesting things hanging from them. Probably the most interesting piece is a German hunting horn, not unlike the one that is the centerpiece of William Michael Harnett's trompe l'oeil painting. It has similar brass and green leather trim. My father bought it, probably in Munich in the 1960s. While not as ornate as Harnett's horn, it's a beautiful form, and it's a beautiful form, and I have always enjoyed looking at it. Oh, I guess he's not the grandson of this man. His father is the architect. Dad was an architect and loved beautiful forms. I don't think he ever played it. Then he goes on down and he analyzes it totally from the perspective, again, of an outdoorsman. 3 types of hunting activities are represented in the painting: stag hunting, upland bird hunting, and waterfowl hunting. How many of us know anything about any of those things? Some of us may know one, if we have a hunter in the family, or we're a hunter ourselves. Some of the most interesting tools used for these pursuits are included in the painting. Upland bird hunting and duck hunting both require the use of a shotgun that fires many small pellets with each shot, hopefully able to hit a flying bird. The shotgun shown here is a very fine double-barreled percussion model. Note the twin triggers. I've lived with this painting for 40 years, and I never looked at this shotgun at all. Note the twin triggers and the left side hammer. The shotgun in this Harnett painting was built for a right-handed shooter. This is proven by the beautifully carved cheek pad that is on the left-hand side of the stock of the gun. Of special interest is the wood from which the stock was made. It is a rare Circassian walnut. It's not only very strong, but also beautifully grained, with high contrast between the dark and light-colored wood. This wood is found in Turkey and England. The English used it mostly in fancy furniture veneers. Okay, in that paragraph, I learned stuff about this painting I've never known because of someone else's expertise that is not looking at it as an art historian. So I'm going to jump way ahead, but you have to hear the end. It's good. He goes through it. He talks about every object and how they were used in hunting and what their meaning is and everything. So then he gets to the end. Last but not least, almost hidden away, is what looks to be a sprig of wheat. It is located in the horn. Let me see. You can see it right here. I believe it is a Zubrovka grass. One blade on top is normal, while the one on top is normal, while the other is in seed. For the most part, Zubrovka grass grows in Poland, and it is a favorite of the European buffalo. If one wanted to hunt buffalo, the best place to find the herds was in Eastern Europe, near its favorite food, the grain. The two types of Polish vodka exist, regular vodka and Zubrovka vodka. The latter is made by taking regular vodka and adding 2 or 3 blades of Zubrovka grass that are not in seed into the bottle before it is capped. This imparts a special flavor that many drinkers consider to be superior to regular vodka. Who has had this vodka? Somebody must have. Is it true? Is it better? It's different. Okay. But they prefer superior to regular vodka. I was introduced to this spirit in Finland in 1960 when visiting my grandparents' home near Helsinki. It's appropriate that Harnet's painting is entitled After the Hunt, because that is when a glass of Zubrovka would be the most enjoyed. So the idea of the book is, and again, there are plenty of wonderful art historians in this book, but this idea of bringing these different voices to the table, and the intersection essay is sort of intersection essays, and there are 11 intersection essays in the book, do it really, really well. The second one I wanted to bring to your attention, because many of you will know this person, this is Reginald Marsh's painting Hudson Bay Fur Company, and one of the writers is Michael Weiss, who is, spent his life in retail fashion, running, different parts of the L Brands company. It's really extraordinary. He was the actual CEO of Express for a while. We all know Michael. His wife is on our board. So Michael, again, we had a great art historian as the foil. These are 2 essays again. There's an art historian. But then Michael writes, if we know nothing else about the Hudson Bay Fur Company, we know that this display window is on the 2nd floor above 14th Street. And we can see that there are live models. In the spirit of there are live models. In the spirit of Marsh, there are 5 models, not 1. But it's far from the crowds he generally painted. His most famous paintings, like those of Coney Island, are really crowded. His crowds are fleshy, thick, heavily sexualized. Although this painting has no crowd, it's not a difficult feat to imagine, of imagination, to see a crowd on 14th Street in front of a 2nd floor display window surrounded by light bulbs, in which women are displaying not only the latest in glamorous fashion, but also themselves. This is 14th Street, a major mercantile thoroughfare, as well as the border of Union Square. It is also the border of Greenwich Village and the East Village and Midtown, not an insignificant border. This is the Depression. Notice that the painting is done in 1932. And in all probability, Union Square at this moment in time has many orators armed with the facts of financial collapse and its ramifications. Socialists, communists, anarchists, and every other ist are passionately encouraging crowds to see the world through their eyes, to see the breadlines, the Hoovervilles, the inequity of the capitalist system, to see desperation. The Hudson Bay Fur Company is asking the same crowds to see the world through their eyes. Aspirationally, a sharp line is implicitly drawn. Desperation or inspiration, look down or look up. He then goes on to tell us something that I did not know, which is that our whole sense of fashion comes from Louis XIV in France. And he ends his essay, an alternative view of what is happening in this picture is that the company is surrounding its windows with light bulbs, not only to light, but to make it look like a dressing table mirror. Women on the street are seeing themselves in that mirror. They are seeing the glamour of the 1930s, so perfectly portrayed by Hollywood at the time, and they are hearing pennies from heaven on the sunny side of the street. The best things in life are free. They smile and they hope. They may wish for or long for better times. They aspire to better times. So again, seeing it from an entirely different perspective is really, is really wonderful. Jen Leahy is realizing that I'm still overcoming my cold and I've got my voices going. This, of course, we should talk about George Bellows. This is absolutely my favorite intersection essay. The two paired writers are Joyce Carol Oates. I mean, how in the world we got Joyce Carol Oates to do this? She loves Bellows. I mean, I know she is a huge George Bellows fan, but it just seems impossible to realize that she actually wrote for our book. I won't read Joyce Carol Oates. I'll let you all discover her on your own, but it's a wonderful essay. And the other essay is written by Lori Booth, who is George Bellows' granddaughter. And she talks about it being her grandfather, who she never knew. George Bellows dies quite young of a burst appendix. And he had two daughters. Lori is the daughter of the second daughter. And her mother was only 9 when George Bellows dies. But she talks about and the struggle of her grandmother, Emma, not only financially. This was an era when if you lost your husband, financial collapse was like around the corner because it was very hard for women to find employment, but also Emma's complete commitment to keeping George Bellows in the story of American art. I think we all think that, if you're extraordinarily talented, of course you're going to be in the storyline. That's not true. You have to have committed. Sometimes it's just happenstance and circumstance, but a lot of times it's a lot of hard work. And Emma Bellows spent decades making sure the right museums got George Bellows and that he got in the right shows, and he did it. She was just an unrelenting sort of advocate for him. And that comes out in so Joyce Carol Oates and his granddaughter are the two ones. Other really high-profile writers that we acquired along the way, when we started working with Wil Haygood on I Too Sing America, Wil started as a journalist and then became a very noted cultural historian. We realized that there was an opportunity. This had been a painting we acquired after the initial, sort of after 2008. And we asked Wil Haygood to write on this. Robert Thompson. I've never seen anybody call him Robert Thompson. It's Bob Thompson. A wonderful, and he writes from his view as an. And then this one, which I do need to read just a little bit. This is by Piper Kerwin, who is well known for her connection to Orange is the New Black. She's, one of the creators of Orange is the New Black. And her advocacy for imprisoned people in this country. And she ends, so you'll just know, this is by a really noted woman photographer, and some of you will have seen it in our galleries. This is what it looks like. It's an installation, and then we give you details of this family whose husband and father is incarcerated, and there's a storyline behind that. And Piper ends her essay with this. In one photo, Lawson's cousin, and that's the other thing, the photographer follows the story of her cousin, who's the woman, Jasmine, and her husband and father of her children. In one photo, Lawson's cousin and Eric kiss in a close embrace. My husband, a visiting room veteran, looking at the image with me and said, "Wow, I'm amazed they were able to get this picture." Guards in visiting rooms often ruthlessly police physical contact, not only between lovers, but also between children and family members. It makes me wonder who took that picture and all these photos. Other incarcerated people, as part of their prison jobs, often do the visiting room photography, and I guess that another incarcerated man, not a prison guard, captured these romantic moments. These flicks are a rare proof of the survival of people who have been exiled from society and the families that share their exile. And again, I think it's these different voices in the book that really give it its worthiness of 705 pages. I wanted to bring a couple of other things to you. Challenges, extraordinary challenges for this book. We own on the left a wonderful still life by John Steuart Curry, who is an American scene painter. And we haven't owned it all that long, and even the acquisition of this painting is fascinating because we bought it from instead of buying it out of New York, we bought it from a regional auction. And regional auctions are harder to get great buys anymore out of regional auctions because they go online, and dealers have gotten quite savvy all over the country to. I'm trying to find it. It's 1940. They've gotten very savvy about finding things online and then bidding from afar. But you use the names of the artists in the way art history knows them, and so you always call him John Steuart Curry. And this regional auction house had listed it as John Curry. And nobody picked up on it. Nobody found it. And so we paid just pennies for this wonderful, wonderful still life. So we got a great buy on it. So we're really proud of it. But the writer really wanted, there's an earlier connected landscape sort of scene that's sort of partially, it's actually the same landscape still life combo, called Death of Beauty from 1935. It's a little watercolor pastel. And we spent, Jordan, was it you that did this? Huh? Danny. So Danny, who is our Liechtenstein fellow, spent countless hours. We knew where this was, who had sold it. It was another very small regional gallery. And trying to get them, they wanted to help us, but there are like two of them. I mean, they're trying to keep their business alive, and this crazy museum from Ohio keeps calling, can't you call the person that bought this, and da-da-da-da-da, and trying to get a decent photograph of it, because all the photographs they would send would be, the resolution would have to be this big. And it's such an important part of the essay that the writer wanted it to be half a page at least, if not a full page. We finally persevered, and we got a hold. They went and took a photograph of it for us. And the reason it's so critical for the understanding of this picture, of course, is that in the final oil version he does of the picture, he eliminates the hunter. And the hunter in this incarnation also looks very much like a death mask. It looks like a skeletal mask, like death is coming. So it's a very different, we really needed it, and it really caused months and months of hard work to just coax this gallery into helping us. She writes a great piece on this. Is actually a former assistant curator here. Some of you may remember Anastasia. Anastasia wrote the piece on this, and it's really wonderful. And she talks not only about, she tells a little story about actually Curry. The day he was trying to create this picture, and probably this one. He really wanted to get a rabbit in there as well. And he just kept waiting and saying, we can't leave till I shoot a rabbit, and then he finally shoots his car because he's trying to shoot a rabbit. It's like a total mess. But it's also interesting that the difference between the two pictures, and to remember that, of course, there's a subtext of this painting. This painting is also about the democratization of hunting in the United States. And again, Curry is an American scene painter, so he's interested in the people. And these ring-tailed, ring-necked pheasants were imported into the United States in the 19th century from China. There was some man who went to get all excited about this. And they start this, he brings them here, and this, of course, a lot of scientists would be horrified. 1882 is when they start hunting them then, and they become very well known that this is something that regular Americans could hunt, even though it's an exotic bird from China. See, before that, the only people who could have taxidermy, ring-necked pheasants was people who'd been to an exotic place like China. So the idea that you could hunt them in Wisconsin is the underlying, storyline for this painting. So other things that are just kind of fun. I just was going to do a whole bunch of like fun things. So these are 4 paintings that we own that we didn't even remember that we owned. One of our curators, Michael Hall, maybe 5 years ago, was going through the racks. I mean, we had a record of these pictures. We know we owned them, but nobody paid attention to them. We had bought them in the 1930s. They had made their way to the back of the painting racks. They needed conservation. They were kind of unloved. And Michael pulled them out and said, these are fantastic, anonymous 19th century portraits. And you want one for your collection, and you want the ones that were done on the East Coast. But these are Ohio. They were done by an anonymous Ohio painter, probably an itinerant painter that went around and knocked on your door and said, hey, I will paint your family. And we then tracked down descendants of these people. And this is all in Michael's essay, where we tracked down descendants of the Clark family. We know they came from Connecticut in the 1830s. And they settle in Morrow County, about 20 miles outside of Columbus. That's where their farm was. And we now even know what happened to Daniel, the son. Daniel leaves Morrow County, moves to Dayton, and then eventually to Chicago. So then he marries and lives in Chicago the rest of his life. So these pictures that had sort of not found love became the sort of centerpiece of a show and made, I think without Michael's work, we'd never have imagined to put them in the American book. Another really wonderful one is this. Everybody knows our great Ernest Lawson picture. When you write about Ernest Lawson, you write about the sort of encrusted paint and how it looks like these encrusted jewels. And it's so beautiful, right? Isn't it just a beautiful snowy snowscape? I mean, it's wonderful. Well, actually, I knew what the general storyline was. This Lawson was interested in the sort of suburban edges, the sort of ratty or suburban edges of Manhattan, where people were beginning to live. And it wasn't like an elegant place to live. It was sort of like on the edges of town. But I never had asked the question about what that building was. This is that building. Now, this gives you an entirely different layer to this painting when you know. So new research, when you know what this painting is, what that building is. The small buildings contrast with the blue mansion at the top of the hill. Actually, this is Anastasia again, by the way. Home to the Magdalen Benevolent Society. The society renamed itself the Inwood House. Look at the title. The Inwood House, the year that Lawson paints this work. Established in New York in the mid-19th century and relocated to its imposing Upper Manhattan location in 1905, Inwood House served as an asylum for so-called promiscuous women and girls. Though it was founded as a refuge with noble intentions, the institution frequently appeared in city newspapers for its riots, its escaped inmates, and some who plummeted to their deaths in the Hudson, and their draconian medical treatments, including mercury treatments for syphilis. Mercury treatments for syphilis was very common at the time, but we now know it was of little help. Perhaps ironically, the Teal estuary below the building is called Sputum de Vol, a devil's spouting, for its violent tidal waters. So knowing what this building is completely changes the meaning of that painting. And there isn't any way Ernest Lawson didn't know what that building was. And he didn't wrap it into the meaning of the picture. So there's several moments of new scholarship that really changed the way I think you see pictures. Here's another great one. I'm not going to read from this one for you, but we own a great trove of Charles Demuth. Charles Demuth is one of the great artists that Ferdinand Howard collected. This is called Modern Conveniences. And the key to this is knowing that Charles Demuth's health, beginning in 1921, he dies by 1935, but he is diagnosed with diabetes in 1921. Now, diabetes today is a very treatable sort of condition that you can live many, many years with. 1921, diabetes was a hugely debilitating disease, and he had a very severe case of it. He he had aspirations of New York and then living in Paris. He gets to live in both places very briefly, but he has to come home to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and his mother has to take care of him. And many of these pictures come from that sort of living in his mother's home in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. This is the back of the house, and here's a photograph of it from 1950. Where you can, and there's actually a famous article in 1950 where it says, you can still walk outside and look back and see modern conveniences. The painting, Modern Conveniences, the writer says you can see it as you look back on the back. The other thing that's haunting this picture, because Demuth had a very witty sense of humor, often very kind of cruel to himself sometimes. So this this would have been nearly impossible for Charles Demuth to navigate with his physical exhaustion, his inability, his legs weakening. So this is just the opposite of modern conveniences for a man who is slowly dying of diabetes. And so this irony around modern conveniences. And the writer of the piece also turned up this wonderful, it's actually done an early design by Steichen of when he was doing commercial work, of the idea of modern convenience was you would see it constantly in commercial advertising. 2 hotels which possess every requirement of the person with inclinations toward modern conveniences and comfortable life. So again, the layering that these writers bring to helping us understand the backstory of these pictures is quite extraordinary. This one is great too. This is Francis Criss, who is a precisionist. This is the Jefferson Market in New York. Jefferson Market Courthouse in New York, and at the time it's a very funny, quirky sort of perspective on the site, and the writer hypothesized, who's actually Melissa Wolf, hypothesizes that the kind of quirkiness of Francis Criss's painting is directly connected to the sort of quirky persona of Mae West, because Mae West was tried twice for obscenity related to a play she was in, and this is where she was tried both times. So again, in 1935, no one could look at the Jefferson Courthouse without knowing, Jefferson Market Courthouse, but knowing that Mae West had been tried there. And the whole sort of way Mae West kind of sort of both sort of her own irony of the way she dealt with the issues of obscenity and how she just made light of it, and people really loved her for that. There she is. This is another, we have 2 Clarence Carters in our collection, and again, when we started the book, we only owned 1 Clarence Carter, so we hired a writer to write on this book, on this painting, and then we end up with a second Clarence Carter that's like the quintessentially famous, it's like the 3rd most famous Clarence Carter. You can't not put it in the book. So we end up, people are like, why do you have 2 Clarence Carters? But we learned great things about Clarence Carter. This actually came out of Clarence's, actually a closet in Clarence's house. His son dragged it out for us, and I bought it from him. There's lots of nervousness about artists, painters, and photography and their connection to photography. And we've discovered over the last, at the end of Clarence's life, it was discovered that he used photography quite a bit. They can be damning for painters. But actually, it was part of his practice. We are less, I think we are less condemning of it today, when we're more like, what was part of his practice? And this, of course, is in Western Pennsylvania in coal country. You can see the coal, and then, of course, all the smokes of coal. And these are the 2 photographs that Clarence took as study pictures, study photos for him to use as he constructed the composition back in his own studio. This really, the big thing that was always kind of discussed, and we didn't know what, was this child. There was a lot of wondering if Clarence was saying something about, was this child developmentally disabled, and was he making a comment on life in coal country and its harshness? And in fact, we now know that it's simply the photograph and the turn of the child's face. This child, was not developmentally disabled in any way, and it's just the way the face is turned. But the other thing that you really capture in this when you see the photograph is how young that mother is and how kind of totally ordinary she is, and how Clarence turns her into this kind of iconic mother and child of, Western Pennsylvania. There's another one that Clarence did too. So this is one of the photographs. Clarence took endless photographs. What I don't know is whether he would not have hired these women. These were not, he really would have just kept walking around, and he might have asked them if he could photograph them. I'm sure he did ask them. But he wouldn't have, these are not hired actors or anything. This is, again, something, my family comes from this part of the world, so women you'd go along the tracks and you'd pick up coal. The coal would fall out of the out of the cars as the trains went, and this was the way your family could have more coal to heat your house. And women would do this. And that's what Jane Reed and Dora Hunt are doing in this picture, and here's the photograph. And then the other thing that's interesting about American scene painters is they became very involved in American commerce. One of the ways they were interested in the democratization of painting and art. They were interested in sort of a very broad, really broad audience. And so one of the ways was they would cut these deals with different major commercial entities in the United States, and they would use versions of their paintings in their ad. So this is an ad from the American Locomotive Company, and Clarence did a specific version of this painting for them without the women in it. So they didn't doctor the picture. Clarence painted this. I don't know where this picture is. Clarence also there was also a great trade in prints, and Clarence's did a print of Jane Reed and Dora Hunt. Last couple things. There are pictures in our collection, or works in our collection, that are also in the book that exist because of us. This is one of them. So Sandy Skoglund's a very well-known contemporary photographer who actually photographs. She makes installations first. So she creates an installation, and then she photographs it. And really the work of art is the photograph. But we commissioned from her, we took a traveling show of Sandy's work, and we then commissioned a new piece of work from her. So she made created the wedding for us. She originally did the installation in her studio, which is where she photographed it. And then we asked her, could she reconstruct the installation for us in Columbus? So this was actually, the installation was in our galleries. It was problematic because when she's working in her studio, she didn't have to leave the installation up very long. We, of course, wanted to leave the installation up for 3 months. The jam, this is jam. This is, marmalade and jam. The weight of the jam kept like, dropping. And we would go up there to try to keep the jam up on the walls of the installation. And it was quite challenging. Then we worried about bugs because, it attracts, it's food. So, it attracts. But we did not have any bugs, I think. But we endlessly had to go and work on that. And then the legacy that this work of art leaves at the Columbus Museum of Art is that this is the moment when we stopped having open mics open radio mics for the guards or for our gallery associates. We used to have it so you could just hear their radios all the time. We now try to use earpieces because there was a special event at the museum and people were in the show, and a woman got a little too close to the installation and she tripped into the orange marmalade. And the gallery associate was up there who was someone who used to be he was a fireman. He was a retired fireman. And all over the building, he said, you could hear it ringing. There was no corner of the building you couldn't hear this because he has an open, he's trying to get help. So he's like, someone needs to come up here because some woman and I think he might have said some stupid woman or dumb woman, has fallen in the goddamn jam. Get up here. And you could hear it all over the building. At which point we said, okay, maybe we need to have ear and, but it's a great photograph. It's also an interesting, we tried a very original, and Annegret will know this, but I don't think Tyler will know. We tried to do a fundraising thing for this, in which we asked Sandy to create small prints of this is a very large photograph. And, if someone gave so much money, it was a complete failure. She only printed them when we had someone who would give $1,000 or something, $1,000, $1,500, I don't know how much it was. I own one, but I think she only ever printed 2 of them. So, the Candy Wylie again exists because we commissioned it. In fact, we commissioned an entire exhibition for Candy, all of it based on works from our collection. Back in 2006, this of course is based on our Virchbronk. You all see it upstairs all the time. But to realize that not only are these great works of art, but they're great works of art that exist in the world because the museum had a piece in making them, had a part in helping them come into creation, is really a very exciting thing. I think this is my last, I have 2 last things. So remember early on when I mentioned the George Bellows and Robert Henry bringing this great show to the Columbus that was from New York and everything? Well, one of the most controversial moments was, we actually didn't own this. This is back in 1911, so this building doesn't exist. We lived out of rented rooms. Some of our rented rooms were over at the library. So this exhibition was supposed to be at the library. And the powers to be, and it was a big show. It was like 140 pictures and prints. The powers to be in the city went over to kind of check it out before it opened to the public. And there was a whole group of pictures that they said, oh, no. You take these down. Take these down. These are very shocking. And the women and children of Columbus will be permanently, their lives will be ruined, if they see these pictures. One of Bellows' boxing pictures had to go into, they wanted them to take it down. And this they really wanted to take down because male nudity, which is very, very rare in American art altogether. The writer of this, who's Jonathan Weinberg, in his essay talks about how rare male nudity is in American painting. And they wanted it taken down. And much to their credit, Bellows and Henry said, if we take those down, we take everything down. And it all goes back. No show. And they came to an agreement that the works that the powers to be in the city thought were very scary would go in a separate room, which the press quickly dubbed the men's room, which was locked, and you had to ask permission to go in it. So the idea, of course, being that only the men of Columbus could see men in mountains, which is actually based on, the title's based on, the whole painting is inspired by a William Blake poem. And so later on, Ferdinand Howe never buys a George Bellows, but he buys, Rockwell Kent buys this picture. It's one of the pictures that Mr. Howe gives us. How mores changed, and so now troops of school children go by this, and no one's is mentally, deranged because of it. But it's there. The last thing, I will leave you with a great quote. One of the writers that I am so incredibly proud that we got to write for this is, it's an intersection essay again, and actually 2 of the great writers, Leo Marx, did Leo Marx die yet? He's like 98. He's a famous historian, so it's incredible that Leo Marx wrote for this book at the age, even then he was at an advanced age. But the other writer was Adam Gopnik of The New Yorker. And I leave you with this quote. Smoke, not ascending chimney smoke, rising and dissipating in the sky like white steam from a calliope, but smoke falling, smoke stiffening into arabesques, smoke invading windows, smoke like hard gray ribbons, smoke like ground snakes, smoke like Gothic masonry, smoke like gouty concrete, smoke almost, perhaps, like excrement. But still smoke. That's what this is, and all this is. This strange gray-brown mass that fills the lower third of the picture. Smoke. And behind it, a night scene as melancholy as De Chirico, with the grim industrial chimneys and steel strutwork that belches up this strange ground-hugging 3D smoke, keeping silent watch while beamed forms like searchlights seem to scan the sky. Pretty good. All right, thank you. Thank you for coming at 11 o'clock in the morning. It's a great book. It's a great gift. It's big, it's heavy. You could also use it for exercise. All right, thank you all.